Republican Senator Tom Cotton gave a speech to the Heritage Foundation recently about disability benefits. And he liked to blame disability benefits on the uptick of a certain type of addiction in the U.S. Let's take a quick look at the video.
After a certain point, when disability keeps climbing and becomes endemic, employers will struggle to find employees or begin or continue to move out of the area. Population continues to fall and a downward spiral kicks in, driving once thriving communities into further decline. Not only that, but once this kind of spiral begins, communities could begin to suffer other social plagues as well, such as heroin or meth addiction and associated crime.
So, look, he wants to attack disability benefits. He's the standard Republican representative who wants to do away with all of those programs that help the needy, okay? So we already know that. But the thing that really got under my skin was him blaming disability benefits on heroin addiction. No, heroin addiction is actually something that's a big problem in the United States right now because of a lack of regulations toward pharmaceutical companies, which push doctors to overprescribe things like OxyContin, and then people get addicted to them, and as soon as they can't get their hands on those prescriptions anymore, they go to the black market to get heroin. That's why we have an issue with heroin addiction in the country right now. So to blame something that's helping those with disabilities for what's happening with drug addiction in America is sick and disgusting, but that's exactly what Republicans do. Either they, A, don't know the reality of these issues, and they just want to attack these programs anyway, or B, do know the realities of these issues, but they look for a scapegoat like disability benefits.
Here's a guy who's literally saying to people who are disabled, some of whom are disabled, why don't you stand up and help yourself? Well, some of them can't, right? So now, not all of them. And don't get me wrong, I'm a little bit more conservative in this regard. I think that if you give benefits, whether it's unemployment benefits, welfare, etc., at a certain point, he mentioned tipping point. You will get to a tipping point where it takes away encouragement to go get a job, because if you're getting a little bit more than you would in a job without having to work, any reasonable human being would be incentivized to take the benefits rather than go to job. Now, it's a bad long-term strategy. We know that, because then you go job to job and hopefully you build a life for yourself, and that's much better, but it's hard to resist sometimes. So it's not like what he's saying in a macro sense is absurd, right? But when you break it down to its components, when you talk about disability benefits, it becomes a little bit more absurd. Mm-hmm. When you say that, hey, you think this is what's causing the heroin addiction in the Appalachian counties that you're talking about, that's preposterous. Now, look, here's what's actually happening in the Appalachians. They're not, the hollows down there aren't exactly Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you have great industry drawing in jobs as you do in some other parts of the country. And it doesn't have to be Silicon Valley. Pittsburgh has built a good tech center. Boston has built a good tech center. Unfortunately, they haven't been able to do that in the Appalachians, right? That's the core of the problem, okay? And it's the jobs. So instead of focusing on the core, what do you want to do? You want to distract people.
Yeah, exactly.
So what he's doing here is he's blaming the people that have been suffering because of the job losses and the lack of industry there. And he's saying it's your fault for being disabled or otherwise in getting these benefits. Mm-hmm. And it's your fault that you didn't want to get a job, and then that led to your heroin addiction.
Right.
Right.
So blaming, these types of benefits on heroin addiction is crazy, but it goes to a larger theme that I'm seeing with the Republican Party right now, where they're using this very important and very serious issue for political gain. It's an issue that they don't really genuinely care about, but they know that it's going to help them, right? So recently, all of a sudden, Jeb Bush and Chris Christie changed their tune when it comes to drug addiction, right? These tough on crime, anti-drug politicians who want to lock everyone away if they're caught trafficking drugs or using drugs. All of a sudden, they're like, I can empathize with people who are addicted to these drugs. And why is that? Because now all of a sudden, there are a bunch of white people who are addicted to heroin, okay? Yeah. The heroin problem that we're having in the country right now has impacted the white population more than any other demographic. It's gone up 114% since 2011.
And sometimes for some of those candidates, it's in their family. Right?
That's exactly right.
They had drug addiction issues in their family. Before, it was easy to demonize, the black people.
Yeah.
And originally, of course, they outlawed marijuana because they wanted to arrest Mexicans coming across the border, right? Oh, they renamed it marijuana, to make it sound like, oh, it's more Mexican, right? So looking at the history of that. Anyway, so now that it's in their own family, they're like, oh, that's kind of inconvenient. Now, the other thing we got to do is we got to distract them because we're actually taking all the money and giving it to the rich in terms of tax cuts and subsidies and all the other favors we're doing for them through crony capitalism. So how do we distract people? Oh, it's the one getting the poorest people in the Appalachians, the ones getting the disability benefits? It's their fault. It's their fault. They're the ones who caused it. How about the pharmaceutical companies, as Anna pointed out, who are actually the single largest donors in the whole country? They donate more to politicians than even oil companies or banks. How about them that push all the OxyContin and all the other drugs? No. It's not their fault. They're my donors. It's not their fault. You hillbilly, it's your fault. Yeah, you're the one who's on the disability benefits. Your fault.